This is going to be a really interesting session. So as I mentioned, we've got the legacy piece, but in addition, what I want to highlight in advance of our next speaker, and we're very lucky to have her, is around adjacent industries, cross industries. Financial services is often quite insular, as are most industries. They focus on what they know and what they already have experience of. But I guess part of this innovation journey, part of the Innotribe platform here is what can we learn from other industries? Are there lessons we can take? Are there opportunities? So with that in mind, I want to introduce Corporate Vice President from Microsoft. I'm going to double check the name in case I mess it up, but it's Toni Tones Whitley. And if you can please welcome her to the stage. Looking forward to this session. Toni, please.
Thank you. This conversation, my role within Microsoft may give you a sense of where I'll go with this discussion. My remit is worldwide industry, and what that means is for all the industries that Microsoft takes to market, whether it be financial services, manufacturing, retail, education, government, health, pharmaceutical, comms, media, I have the opportunity to circumnavigate the globe with customers around what innovation looks like and how our technology can light it up. And so what we're learning is a cross-industry discussion is an interesting one because many industries are learning from others. So if you're going to allow me for a moment, let me just lift and circle and come back to the financial services industry for just a moment in this idea of creating a space for innovation. So let me just take you forward and lift to 2020 and just what we see about what will be happening at that time. Some of the data just to set the tone for what's going forward. People generating massive amounts of data. Unprecedented opportunities for innovation. Just the number of devices and how much data each individual will create. That gives us a sense of both the, if you will, comprehensive feel for the future, but also the complexity that will go with it. This idea about human jobs and cobot, which is the collaboration between human and robot. We spend a lot of time in manufacturing and retail talking about the cobot experience. The fact that that second to last bullet, the average person having more conversations with a bot than a human, my husband's personal favorite, I'm not taking it personally. This is the 2020 view that's lifted to just set the stage. So let me lift you up, and now let's talk about what's needed to create space for innovation. You know, at Microsoft, for 43 years, we've had an amazing legacy, an amazing platform, an amazing set of performance. And yet, we've been spending time with neuroscientists, people like Dr. Carol Dweck, to shift our mindset. And here's what we've learned about innovation. 4 things required to shift your mindset. You probably know some of them. First, quiet. Second, internally focused, not externally distracted. Third, might find interesting, slightly positive. So all of the negative folks in the audience, innovation is created with a slight, not an overly enthusiastic, but a slightly positive mindset. And fourth, when you're not thinking directly about the problem. So anybody who has innovation hour during your day, at 3 o'clock I'm going to innovate around my platform, let me just let you know, that doesn't consistently work with the neuroscience research. So that's why we look across industries and then across different areas to understand what innovations are occurring. So I'm going to ask you to do all 4 with me. I'd like you to be slightly positive. 1, personally, it makes me feel better if you smile at me. And some of you are not there yet. I just want to highlight some in the back I won't name. I want you to focus on how what you're hearing addresses your day-to-day and make some translations. We're going to stay a little bit quiet, and we're not going to think directly about every problem in financial services. We're also, if you don't mind, we're going to use a little bit of the frame that Microsoft is using because we're a framework kind of company. In addition to being a platform company, we need to think in frames. And the way we frame the transformation that is powered by innovation for our customers is in this 4x4 frame. We frame it on the 4 verticals around the way we now package our products into solution areas so that we're not doing transactional license-based selling of products, but fundamentally driving towards solutions. And we all look at the outcomes in terms of a digital transformation journey for our customers. You can see the journey around how do we empower the employees, How do they engage with their customers differently? How do we change or optimize the infrastructure, the operational infrastructure, which can usually be quite costly? And then finally, what does that full business model transformation look like of products and services? Let's go to the UK for a minute in the tax authority. Let me just give you a couple of the details here. So let's talk about the UK tax authority, 56,000 employees. This is in an area that when we did a CIO study for the UK of what digital transformation looked like a couple of years ago, the only area that was not judged highly in the top 10 was employee. We were digitally transforming to customers, B2B, G2B, C2C, but we had nothing related to the employee experience. And so this is an interesting conversation about how this transformation occurred. They were using paper-based systems to do all forms of, if you will, inspection of oil and tax, and this is called the Oil Real-Time Challenge application. We provided Surface, Windows Office 365, and now these audit capabilities are in a single touch, single system, paperless, end-to-end. Handwriting is done with our facial recognition and other forms of AI, and all the way through we have a seamless operation for their employees. Employees sat up, all the interim steps of the business process collapsed, and a full innovation of the employee experience. Now, let me move you to a customer experience conversation. What are we going to learn from a beer maker? What are we going to learn about, if you will, their moment of truth? They decided as the 4th largest brewery that they needed to do something to drive their customer experience. Maybe some of you all know about trying to capture the customer experience. They call it the moment of truth. And they put all of their data science around capturing this moment of truth. Now, anybody drink beer? It's okay, because you're not taped. I am, thank you. And so for the beer drinkers, what's the moment of truth you think they were capturing? Just let me know. What do you think was the moment of truth, Carl? The first beer. Love it. First beer. Anyone else? The second beer. Okay, so obviously we have some of the deeper beer drinkers here, or on the velocity of beer drinking. Anything else on the moment of truth? What would they define it as? This moment of truth that drives their customer experience. I didn't hear you. Just repeat it for me so I can say it up. Returning to drink it again. So a lot of beer recapture and renewal going on here in the audience as we look at beer. So that moment of truth, knowing exactly where people are, what they're doing, what's influencing their decision to buy a beer. And all of the technology you heard was a legacy platform, of which Azure was the selected platform to drive cognitive services, predictive analytics, IoT-enabled sensors to start to get through and understand how to triangulate around that customer experience. That is one of the examples of how we're driving innovation in that, if you will, consumer packaged goods space. Let me move also then to ASOS. How many people know of ASOS? Just give me a show of hands. I want you to know why it's so cool that you raised your hand. Because ASOS is an online retailer that is totally focused on capturing the online retail market for 20-somethings. So I'm sure all of the youthful people in the room know all about ASOS. What's interesting about ASOS, as we learn about this type of innovation, they did an infrastructure, they looked at their infrastructure for supporting an e-commerce platform. Why was it important? Because you can look at the numbers. 13.4 million customers, 85,000 products on their site, 4,500 going live every week. If I have any product managers in the room and you're dealing with those types of numbers, this is why they were looking for an e-commerce platform with Microsoft. They transformed it by putting it and running on the cloud with Azure. And what's interesting about this, if you look at their monthly pull, more transactional volume than Amazon retail on a monthly basis, just to give you a sense of how many transactions they're running. This is the impact that they had by putting that e-commerce platform on one of the strongest, most robust platforms on the planet, and this 25% revenue growth for being able to absolutely segment content directly for their customer base. ThyssenKrupp, that was my last example of, and if you remember the digital journey, we've gone through employees, customers, the infrastructure, and the last was the product. This product innovation. But I would argue this is a business model innovation with ThyssenKrupp. ThyssenKrupp, we started with them talking about elevator service with their employees, how to do predictive maintenance with artificial intelligence for their employees, for elevators. And so one of the things we talk about with legacy is the innovations for a ThyssenKrupp is now creating a new business model around being able to capture data with a HoloLens and go directly to production. There is no middle step. That's the 4 times increase. So that's when we start talking about innovation. What can we learn from different industries that influence where we sit in financial services? One of the things that we're spending a bit of time on is this case for looking at the effect of digital natives, those companies that were born in the cloud, most recently, that come into the space, into the industry as digital natives. In this space, you might call them some of the fintechs, but every industry has digital natives. And you can see that the digital natives are capturing their share and more of the market space. There's a way that they're doing that we believe applies to every company. Every company, and every company can have a leapfrog into this market share. We call this the digital feedback loop. And what that fundamentally means that every company has at its core, at its root of innovation, a virtuous cycle of 2 forms of signal. Signals from product and product telemetry, signals from customers and customers' feedback. It is in the integration of these loops and the willingness to move in a viral fashion with this data that we see the greatest increase for a company. Let me give you 2 examples. Netflix. I've given you ASOS, I'll come back to it. Netflix. We all know the Netflix story. We know what was the, if you will, intrusion and disruption into the video rental space, into streaming. But do we know the steps of that story that took a recommendation engine that was built in that disruption and really got keen on data on customer preference? So keen that Netflix then went into the next loop of providing and starting to establish content that they were then able to focus on their customers. As they started to gain new customers, they started to gain new data. This is the loop that we're talking about, the signals. And so you can see as just one example, I could have put a customer sat example for Netflix. There's so many different measures to say how successful they've been. This is just one that looks at Emmy nominations and how quickly they've captured that market in a very short period of time over traditional providers. ASOS, the same thing. Personalized customer experience, content fully curated to a very specific customer set. That knowledge captured, product telemetry integrated, and then on the platform, they made a change to go to Azure to a platform to help drive the e-commerce platform, and you see the revenue results. This is what we learn cross-industry, that digital feedback loops are going to be what's necessary for companies to accelerate. Look, I asked you to let me take us around the world. Thank you for that. I asked you to let me take you cross-industry. Thank you for that. I'm coming back. I do know the name of the conference is Sibos. I have a sense of what you all do for a living. Let's come back to financial services for a moment. What we've learned on the financial services innovation is a very small part of your budget is actually earmarked for innovation. If we're honest with ourselves, most of the IT spend, even the COG spend, is often about feeding the beast of the basic platforms and legacy kinds of applications and infrastructure that you have. And so we know that it's a small part. So the question is, how then do we get the most out of that innovation budget? And what can we do? We're also learning as we look at what's happening around the world in FinServ that we have an opportunity. We start to connect the dots between an interesting correlation on personal data. That first quote I find phenomenal. Remember, I serve in regulated markets across government. I deal with highly secure institutions and enterprises. And it's interesting to see the supply-demand curve starting to shift. We're looking to see how much is this related to generational shift. But this willingness to offer up more personal data for value-added services as long as they're customized. Interesting for retail banking. Interesting for insurers on what the real cost savings on the COGS model can be with different forms of infrastructure. And then interesting on this collaboration between fintech and enterprise financial institution. It's because of that last one and some of the data that we're capturing around the feedback loop that Microsoft is very focused on bringing these 2 communities together. In fact, I would argue that our definition of innovation right now is how to bring these two entities together. And we have some examples here. But let me just start with, we've launched something called a startups team. That's about identifying the startups and carrying them through not only the Microsoft portfolio, but how do they engage within this industry? How do we get their innovation on our platform, and how do they go forward with great speed and agility with you? So if you're on the left side and you're bringing the base, a historical base, regulatory expertise, a customer set. If you're on the right side and perhaps you're bringing an innovative, smaller base, but an innovative platform, an innovative set of IP, our goal right now is to drive that engagement with our platforms as quickly as possible. A couple of the examples of how we're doing that. You'll hear, some of you may have seen some of the workshops there. We've got one around, if you will, PayKey, which is an app that provides social network platforms matched to many enterprise banks. This is about an application being able to drive financial services from any application on any app platform, called PayKey. The second one that we've also talked about, you'll hear about, and I think Satya, our CEO, will speak about when he speaks to this audience in a couple of days, will be around our partnership with Blue Prism and identity. And we've teamed up to streamline, if you will, for an anti-money laundering solution that we are demonstrating here, a blockchain solution with our AI capability. If you haven't had a chance to stop by that session, I would ask for you to take a look at what we're doing. This is about bringing fintech innovation on our platform to scale and accelerate in the enterprise space. So lastly, let me just say that this conversation is around innovation. This conversation is around each of you individually making space in your personal lives, in your professional lives, in your institutions, in your organizations to innovate. Innovation doesn't just happen. You have to make space for it. I gave you 4 personal ways to make space for it at the beginning of this. Hopefully you've taken those away. Get personal, focus in, stay quiet, don't think about the problem you're trying to address. How we innovate personally. But organizationally, the question is, what are we going to change and how are we going to drive this kind of innovation?